Granny Nalani McDougall reigns from here. This moku of Pula here on Maui is a Kanaka Oiwi, Hawaii, and Kauai lineages, Chinese and Scottish descent. She is the author of a poetry collection, The Salt Wind, Kamakani Pa'akai, Kuleana Oiwi Press, and the co-editor of Hui Hui, Navigating Art and Literature in the Pacific, an anthology focused on Pacific aesthetics and rhetorics at the University of Hawaii, a former Mellon and Ford postdoctoral fellow. Her monograph, Finding Meaning, Kaona and Contemporary Hawaiian Literature, was awarded the 2017 Beatrice Medicine Award of Scholarship in American Indian Studies and Kapalapala Po'okela honorable mention. Nalani is an associate professor specializing in Indigenous Studies in American Studies Department. Courses she teaches in American Studies include Introductions to Indigenous Studies, Indigenous Literature and Film, Indigenous Identity. She received her College of Arts and Humanities and Excellence degree, Excellence in Teaching Award, in 2017. She's on sabbatical currently on leave for the was on sabbatical leave in 2017-18 academic year. And her current research focuses on the rhetorics and aesthetics of Indigenous women's activism, fashion within land, water, protection movements. So if we could give a round of applause for Nalani McDougall. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui, aloha, aloha mai kako, aloha mai e nā akua, nā kupuna makamai, nā mamo a haloa, nā pua o Hawaii, nā kumu, aloha, aloha mai kako. Really, really honored to be with all of you here today, albeit virtually. I wanted to be there in person, especially because, you know, more than just being or having kula as my ainahanao, actually the ahupua of Aupueo is my ainahanao, or I consider it my ainahanao. I was raised pretty close by the Maui campus, right across the street. My kupuna were among the first to get aina at Kula 200 when it first opened up, and they had you know, flower farm there, and you know, I'm so sad that I can't be there with all of you today, and then also I don't get to see my kupuna to visit. I was just too worried about COVID and how it's going around. So mahalo nui to Kehao and all of the other organizers for accommodating me through Zoom, and I guess others too, right? And mahalo to all of you for being here today. Yeah, you know, hano hano no ho'i aoi, kuka no Kaona kia la. Kaona is a, you know, a subject really close to my heart. As you heard through, I guess, the ho'olauna, you know, I come to the study of Kaona first by being a poet, by being a creative person. So just wanted to share that a little up front. But I have a presentation that I prepared for all of you. I did share it in a Google Drive folder, which I think can be shared with all of you too. So don't worry about taking too many notes or whatever. I always tell students that, so I thought I'd tell you guys that too. Don't yeah, stress over that. Everything in this presentation will be in the Google Drive for you. Okay, so I'm going to talk about Kaona as an intellectual practice and how you can incorporate it as a part of your teaching as well as your learning as a kumu. This was my way of just feeling as though I was closer to all you folks on the slopes of Haleakala. I wish I was there with all of you. Okay, so this is just really quickly my first poetry book, just to emphasize how I'm coming to this as a poet. And this is my book that focuses on Kaona and contemporary Hawaiian literature. Others before me and after me have really kind of devoted, I think, a lot of their mana'o and ike to also kind of looking at and examining Kaona within, you know, our mo'olelo kupuna in Olelo, Hawaii. So also kind of seek them out, you know, folks like Noi Noi Silva, Ku'ualoha Ho'omanawanui, Noilani Arista, you know, all, you know, there's a lot there. Also kind of older work by John Charlot, I think could be really interesting for you folks if you'd like to kind of learn more about Kaona. But my work has focused on our contemporary literature, which has mainly been written in English, although I should say a lot of contemporary Hawaiian literature, though it's primarily written in English, incorporates a lot of Olelo Hawaii. And Olelo Hawaii really also continues to be used to carry that kauna and meaning in those works as well. And this is my, this is going to be a brand new work. It's not out yet. It comes out in a year from now. This is my next book of poetry I just wanted to share, called Aina Hanau. And I was excited because I just got the cover. So you guys are seeing it first. You guys are seeing it first. And it features beautiful artwork by Joy Lehuanani Inomoto here. Yeah, love this piece anyway. So first, I'm just going to talk about, by way of background, mo'olelo, mo'okuauhau, and Kaona. And so, of course, you know, mo'olelo is story. It's often translated as story, but it's also history. And I love this because it was, I think, our kupuna's way and our collective way now of recognizing that history is really constructed as a story, right? And it depends on perspective, like all stories depend on perspective, right? And I think that's really important, a really powerful idea for our haumana to think about. And also use it to then question, you know, things that they might have learned either through, you know, prior schooling or through messages they get through media, including social media, right? Next is mo'okuauhau, which is often translated as genealogy, but it's also a form of history, right? It's a recorded history. So we need to also kind of look at it as a form of historical telling that our kupuna used as well. And then finally, we have Kaona, which I define, and I kind of break a little bit from previous definitions of Kaona to say that rather than it being a figurative device or a literary device of some kind, I really emphasize that Kaona is an intellectual practice, and it's a practice of hiding and finding meaning. And it can include these other kinds of literary tropes or devices like allegory, allusion, symbolism, and figuration, okay? But for me, it's a practice. The more that I studied about like how it actually works and what is happening when folks are engaging in Kaona, whether it's trying to decipher or interpret the meaning of mo'olelo kupuna or olelo no iao, or in being artists ourselves and thinking about the kinds of messaging we would like to include within our art. It really became clear to me it was really an intellectual practice that was happening. Also, just wanted to point out the amazing artwork by Imai Kalani Kalahele here. This piece is the first, or it's the top half of a very long, long lengthwise artwork called Kumulipo and Poele. And I wanted to point out also that he used magic markers to create this. Isn't that amazing? I got to see it in person up close and just blown away by it. Sorry about that. Okay, now it's taking a long time to go through it again. I'm sorry. Trying to go through. Okay. I also just wanted to briefly mention how it's important for us to think about the constructedness of mo'olelo. And because there's ways in which we are always living mo'olelo to some degree. And sometimes those mo'olelo are good mo'olelo, right? They are very in line with Hawaiian cultural values. They're in line with ike from our kupuna. They benefit and help our ohana, but sometimes the mo'olelo told about our people are really destructive too. And so I'm thinking of like, racist stereotypes, for example, as a kind of really destructive mo'olelo, right? And the ways in which living that kind of mo'olelo, is really, rather than being life-giving, if you have good mo'olelo, it can be really life-depleting and could, people, it's not overstating to say that people's lives depend on the kinds of mo'olelo that they live, right? So just wanted to kind of point that out. I also share this just to kind of emphasize that it's important for us to engage with mo'olelo in general and mo'olelo interpretation, because it also ensures that our mo'olelo continue to live, right? And again, emphasizing those mo'olelo of our kupuna that give us insight into, also who we are and our connections to Aina, all of that great stuff. We have to make sure that we incorporate this into our teaching so that those mo'olelo continue to live within our haumana, and they can then pass it on to their ohana as well. Okay. So it involves telling and retelling our ancestral history sometimes, maybe through, maybe it could be contemporary reinterpretations of what those mo'olelo could be. Or were, or just sort of seeing how they continue in our lives. It also involves kind of performing, publishing, dancing, drawing, and enacting these mo'olelo and to also celebrate others doing the same. And then reflecting on their multiple meanings and lessons together. And all this is a way for me to kind of emphasize that Kaona is a way for us to reflect on those multiple meanings and to teach our haumana to engage in that kind of practice as well. Okay. All right. So Kaona specifically, I want to point out, this is the bottom half of Imaikalani Kalahele's piece of Kumulipo and Poele. So Kaona recognizes our shared histories as a people, cultural and other lived experience. So it really centers Hawaiian culture and Hawaiian experiences and genealogical connections as well. It also really centers, or really forces one to engage with empathy, right? And to really, it teaches us that empathy and reflecting on the artists, where the artist was at when they created a particular work, or where our kupuna, like what were our kupuna experiencing when they created a particular mele. It really forces us to kind of think about and empathize with them and their place in the world, their experiences. And so Kaona, in order to kind of engage with this kind of intellectual practice, you need to really kind of hone those skills of empathy and reflective understanding. Okay. Also, just wanted to point out too that Kaona recognizes we're the continuations of our ancestors. Like we're continuing their work by engaging in this practice. And we need to also look at ourselves as really kind of extensions of them, right? Okay. All right, so I just wanted to briefly talk about Kaona connectivity. So Kaona, I also wanted to mention, you know, creates connections between us and our ancestors. So it reflects on how, you know, when we come to a work, for example, by our kupuna, right? Not only are we needing to engage with them through empathy, we're also kind of engaging with them, thinking through like what we would do in their place, right? And then also what are the ways in which our culture and cultural values and cultural practices kind of continue. So there's a way in which we can't get away from that connection, which is really beautiful, right? In order to kind of engage in Kaona, it immediately kind of fosters a connection that can mean that we're engaging with connection with our kupuna. It also means that whatever work that we're creating, there's a way in which our mo'opuna, our descendants, are then able to kind of engage with us. So think of it as this like really kind of beautiful, ongoing, you know, pilina that we're a part of. All of this mo'o, right? That's just kind of continuing. Kaona connectivity also, I think another great thing about it is that when we're kind of engaging in Kaona in the classroom, and this is what I really want to share with you folks today, is it enables a kind of connectivity or pilina between people who are also seeking that knowledge or also engaging in Kaona with us, right? And that's something that we desire, right? So it's not only kind of between generations, it's also like amongst ourselves, like what are the conversations that are happening now? Where is our Ike now? And the ways in which we can come together to kind of share that Ike with each other to move everybody forward, okay? All right, so getting into Kaona as a teaching and learning practice. So of course, Kaona, I want to be clear, even though I think this is a practice that to some extent is a part of many other folks' cultures, right? When I'm talking about Kaona and using it in the classroom, I'm speaking in particular about how to use it to engage with Mea Hawaii. Okay, so that could include ancestral texts or works, but it could also include, you know, contemporary works and texts, okay? Kaona also kind of recognizes the social dynamic of learning and collaborative meaning making. I don't know, I studied education a long time ago. And when I first was studying it, constructivism was like this huge thing. And I think it still is now because it's really important as a theoretical concept. And I feel like Kaona is one of those tools that really falls in line with the constructivist mindset, right? That learning is and should be social, it should be collaborative, the emphasis on learning communities, so upholding a collective responsibility for learning rather than individual learning, you know, centering those pilina between haumana, but also kind of negating the authority of the kumu within all this, right? So the kumu is a facilitator and collaborator even rather than the one kind of leading and holding all knowledge that they then, you know, kind of give to students. So this is very constructivist in framework, and it's something that it's a intellectual practice that comes to us from our kupuna. Also, I think this is also important. Kaona emphasizes home and community along with school as vital spaces of learning. So a lot of our haumana kind of in the American system of schooling are often led to believe, not necessarily because anyone tells them directly, but this is just kind of like the messaging they get from around them, that school is the primary place where there's learning happening, and that's where knowledge happens, right? But Kaona really kind of asks them and encourages them to think of like the knowledge that they just naturally get from their ohana or from just their experience being Hawaiian, right? It also, in that way, it values ancestral and family wisdom as prior knowledge, and they're going to be asked to bring all of that in order to engage with Kaona in the classroom. So there's a centering of Oiwi life, experience, culture, and epistemologies. I already mentioned empathy and casting kuma as facilitators and collaborators. But along with this, it challenges haumana to genealogize and create personal connections. So it encourages them to think about or reflect on the ways in which they might connect to whatever work they're being asked to kind of interpret together, okay? In doing so, the haumana process this kind of engagement and knowledge, not only intellectually, but also emotionally, physically, and even spiritually as part of it. And they're also being asked to kind of think metacognitively, like to think about their thinking, right? To reflect on that, like how they came to that knowledge. And in doing so, in kind of giving them more power over that process, it becomes naturally more pa'a to them. Like it becomes something that they've arrived to on their own or with their friends in class. And by way of that, it becomes more a part of their memory and a part of their way of doing. And you've equipped them with a new tool to approach many, many, many things that they'll encounter in their lives. Okay, so how can we use Kaona in the classroom? These are just some suggestions. I think, you know, all of like so many of you folks have been teaching, you know, for so long, you know, and so please just take this as just my own kind of mana'o of how to maybe incorporate this, or feel free to use what you think is useful and whatever, add to it. I'm sure you guys will have your own awesome and better mana'o for this. But to start off, I think it's always good to kind of give just a basic definition of Kaona, especially for those haumana that aren't familiar with it. And then you can ask students to share their prior knowledge, okay? Be prepared for a lot of haumana because previously they might have engaged with Kaona or might have heard of Kaona as being mainly sexual in some way. So just prepare for that because they might have heard like that's a part of mele or something like that, which they aren't wrong, but it's not only sexual. And so that's something just to be aware of. When I was teaching at Kamehameha at Kapalama, it came out. That's what came out. So I just wanted to mention that might be something you come across. But ask students to share their prior knowledge and you know, talk about it. Next, you know, emphasize Kaona as part of like an ongoing practice of intellectualism, that it comes from our kupuna and it continues in our culture, and that it's actually giving us a responsible and active reading and interpretive practice. So as they're doing this, they're, you know, as engaging in Kaona, they are engaging in responsible and active reading and interpretation, okay, which is so important in so many ways. So also you can emphasize Kaona is about pilina between the artists and the audience. So they are the audience in this case, so kind of emphasizing that. But it's also pilina between members of the learning community. And then this next step, I think, is really important, kind of sharing with all of them that they all come from their own, mo'oku'auhau and their own unique knowledge based on that mo'oku'auhau, as well as their experience and ways of thinking. And that in order to do this, everybody needs to be able to share knowledge, even if it seems really small, okay, to help each other out. And what I mean by that is like different people in the class will be able to notice things that others won't. And so even if it's a small thing, it might be something that breaks open. And I'll share, or breaks open an entire new way of thinking about it. And I'll share an example that happened within my classroom in a little bit. But also there's no one correct answer. And I think that's really important for them to know about. It's not like they're trying to guess, what the right answer is and that you're the one who has the right answer, right? It's that everyone's coming together, including you as kumu, in order to, kind of expand your knowledge about what that is. And you might not even be able to I guess, address everything or interpret everything. There might be insights that come even later beyond the lesson, right? Other things that you can do is, share students should try to find out about the creator or the artist or artists, the time they were living in, what their experience was, and then to think about what their experience was and values based on the text or the work of art. From there, you can have the class generate questions about what they feel would be important to know. By this point, they maybe wouldn't have read the actual or seen or viewed or listened to the actual work, but maybe they would know enough about the subject in order to generate some questions ahead of time. Then have them read and listen. So all of this stuff is kind of like a before, before applying Kaona, okay? But then have them read, listen, or view the Mea Hawaii that you're looking at. First individually, I suggest just quietly focusing, and then maybe give them 5 minutes to themselves to just write any thoughts or questions down, as well as to note any details that stick in their minds or na'au, and why those details stand out to them. So this is just like private reflection. It would be free writing. They don't necessarily have to hand it in, but it's a way for them to just sort of gather their thoughts, right? From there, you can have them share their findings in groups. You could also have the whole class kind of read it again together. It depends on your preference, but having them share their finding in groups is really key, in small groups, and then to share as that group with the whole class. I found, and I'm sure you guys find this too, it becomes an easier way for students, especially those who are more on the quiet side or shy, to be able to share their ike, right? So in a smaller group first, emphasizing that everybody has to share something in that small group. And then as a larger group, they share with the whole class, okay? Then, have students follow their na'au from there. So in their groups, have them kind of find the answers to those questions that they still have. Have them do like a group research project, maybe it could be a full project, or maybe it could just be more casual research for a day's lesson, depending upon what you're looking at in terms of the Mea Hawaii. Then I think it's always great to offer some space for verbal or written group or individual reflection on what they gave to this activity in terms of prior knowledge, and then what they gained in terms of like the new knowledge that they got from it. This is also a good space for them to kind of do their own creative like reflections and works of art, right? Poems, mele, artwork, dramatic monologues, all that good stuff could be part of their reflection and their thinking through that kaona further, okay? So these are just, I just have a few like more specific I guess, lessons I'll share a little bit that I think could perhaps tie to a number of different disciplines. You know, I think our kupuna were very interdisciplinary, and a lot of our mea Hawaii, you know, from them as well as what's created today, lend itself to many different disciplines. So I'm trying to share a few of them here. So this is one example, kind of choosing a mele pana. It could be any mele pana. I just shared an example of mele o kaho'olawe here. And of course, mele pana as mele that focus on, you know, wahipana or storied places, you know, create space for, space for students to engage in mele analysis, right? And this could work for social studies, history, geography, Hawaiian studies, literature studies, Olelo Hawaii, hula, music, all kinds of stuff. It depends on the mele, really. You could actually add more to that, depending on the mele, right? But, you know, I suggest mele koho'olawe here, because this would be a really kind of beautiful lesson that could enable students to engage with all kinds of things related to, you know, even just culturally, what is aloha aina, and how was it being used during the movement to protect koho'olawe, right? They could kind of engage with that history as well, the history of that social justice movement and aina protection, right? And how it relates to, you know, ongoing aina protection, like on Oahu with Kapu Kaki or Red Hill, or Haleakala, right? Mauna Kea, you know, all these places. So I suggest having them listen to the mele, and you can choose any number of just amazing folks that have performed this mele in their recordings. And then have them read the lyrics in Olelo and the English translation. I always suggest with these, like having them do a na'au check of some kind, you know, having them think through, okay, what are the emotions that are there? You know, what do you hear in the music, you know, in the mele? Like what's the feeling that you're left with when you read it, right? And then have them kind of go from there, pursuing those questions that they've generated, pursuing, you know, things that they're curious about, or details that stand out to them, okay? Here's another suggestion. This is another lesson or possibility, is with poem analysis. So it depends on the poem. I'm suggesting this one by Naomi, or there's actually two poems by Naomi Loesch. One is called Blood Quantum, the other is called Blood Quantum 2. I have the first one here that you can read. It was published in Fetu Moana, Contemporary Polynesian Poems in English in 2003. But this kind of work with Kaona could lend itself to, of course, English, literature studies, Hawaiian studies, social studies, history, also speech and theater. If you, for those of you kumu that might be interested in having students kind of perform poems, I think that would be a really interesting assignment or task for students to do. Again, reading quietly and then out loud, maybe dramatically, and then always thinking through the na'au check. So in this particular poem, what's interesting is I never would have thought, or I didn't think about, even though fractions are so much a part of Blood Quantum, as a as a humanities-centered person, as a person who has studied literature, I left math like a long time ago, and my brain doesn't even like think about that anymore. Like I see numbers and I'm like, oh, okay, numbers, you know. So I had been teaching this particular poem for a long time before I came to, like, pretty much soon after it was published. And then I came to teach at Kamehameha Kapa Lama campus, 9th grade English in 2009. Okay, so I had been teaching this poem for about 6 years and never thought about it had the Haumana kind of read this poem, reflect on it, and think about Kaona and all of that good stuff. And I had a student, I'm like, what do you notice? What do you notice? You know, and different students were pointing out different things. But one of the students was like, oh, I noticed the fractions, you know, and I was like, oh, what do you mean? I'm like, yeah, they use fractions. I'm like, it's horrible. Like blood quantum, like is all about like fractions. And I was like, I went off on like, on, you know, how it's intended to kind of like fractionize us, and that doesn't work for our identity, you know, and all kinds of stuff, right? But the student was like, well, the fractions themselves are interesting. And I was like, what do you mean? And they were like, well, it's all like just at or just below or just over the 50% or the half. And I was like, oh my gosh, you're right. And that was something that had never dawned on me until this student pointed that out. So again, multiple disciplines and students coming in, you know, everyone is able to kind of see something different, you know, and expand our knowledge of it. So anyway, but you know, there are poems like this that really go in depth, where you could really kind of look at every single line and be like, wow, what is she talking about when she mentions certain kupuna like liloa, kuali'i, and alapai? You know, she's talking about certain wahipana like mokuohai, kepaniwai, and nuuanu. What does she mean by that? You know, so there's so many ways in which students can kind of engage and try to find out more information just by trying to like approach this through the practice of Kaona, right? Like looking at the poem as a source of knowledge that needs to be interpreted and added to. Okay. All right, this is another one. Visual and film analysis, again, depends on the film, but could be a few different disciplines, I think. I'm using the example of the Haumana, which is the feature film by Kel Wolford, but I also suggest Kapai Mahu, the short animated film by Hinale Moana Wangkalu. Having them view the film as a class, especially if it's short, you know, watching it twice so they can get all those details, discussing scenes, like what are the central issues and conflict, artistic choices that maybe, you know, the director or artists are making, how are, you know, are people depicted here, and then also just again the na'au check I think is so important, because it really you know, asks our hamana to think about like, okay, how are they feeling in their bodies as they're kind of watching this, and to understand the body is a source, you know, our na'au is a source of knowledge as well. Okay, and then the final one I'll share here, and again, you can apply this to any number of things. So there's so much more. You could also just have a whole lesson devoted to one olalo no eau, you know, but is visual art analysis. So of course this could apply to art, our kumu who are teaching art, but could be so many other disciplines as well. So I'm sharing works by Alison Lealoha Milham here, who I'm honored actually is going to have her artwork in my next poetry book, and just wanted to kind of give you folks a little preview of that here as well. But when it comes to kind of visual art analysis, having them kind of engage with OEV art by doing quiet viewing, then sharing discussion, and also na'au check, you know, like what's the feeling, especially what's the tone that comes from a particular piece, right? And then knowing the title, you know, our mauna, our piko, like what does that mean to them? What's being shown, you know, in this image? Interestingly enough, she did this all through Sumi ink, which is, I'm always just, I'm blown away by her work. So I wanted to share it here. And here's another piece by her that was using kind of overlays of a map, and it should be a map that you might recognize the aina for which it is mapped, and just sort of the layering that she does kind of through this So this is a piece that she's done called Wauakua. Okay. So anyway, these are just some things I wanted to share. I thought if you folks wanted, you could also kind of ask me any questions you might have about anything. I'm here if you if you'd like to talk story or Kama'ilio a little bit more. Mahalo.
Mahalo na lani. Hey, Mauni nau ka'oko, any questions? And sorry, I just stepped out for a few minutes, but did you mention, Alani, about your niece and nephew that are here at Kamehameha's Maui campus?
No, I did not. But yeah, they are there, and actually I had cousins that just graduated from there too. Yeah, but my niece and nephew. So Kawai Anu, Shaw is my niece, and Easton Nahinu Shaw is my nephew. So yeah, I know, miss them. I wish I could have been there also to hug and squeeze them too.
Our brother-in-law and I grew up from small kid times.
Oh yeah. Oh,
Justin Shaw. Yeah. Yes,
Oh,
yes.
awesome.
No, Laila. Any questions, mana'o, that folks would like to share? Mai maka'o. The art was absolutely fabulous. One of our kumu had mentioned.
It's beautiful. I know. I'm so lucky I get to be, I know so many fabulous artists, but our people are so talented. Like our people are so talented. There's so much art for you to choose from to bring to your classrooms. Yeah.
Any other mana'o? For art. One of the questions was, do you have any one more time, a collection of resources that you might be willing to share?
Oh yeah, I'd be happy to share. What I can do is I can put together like a bibliography. Well, it depends on what kind of resources you guys, what would be most helpful for you guys. Are you guys looking for resources like, because I had examples of like how this could work, like with like specific kinds of texts or works of art, but also just Kaona itself. What would be most helpful for you guys, or just a mix of all that?
Both, please.
Both, okay.
Yes.
Okay, I can do that. I can put together just like essays of folks discussing what Kaona is and stuff like that, as well as like different either works of literature or artwork, like visual art or film, and I'll share all the stuff that I teach.
And anything science related as well.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And you can send that over to Kihao, and we can figure out how to get that out.
Okay.
Disseminate it out to our staff.
Okay, are there quite a few science kumu or interested in kind of other, like bringing in, I know that's always something that people are like, especially like the math kumu, science kumu, like how do we incorporate more, mea Hawaii, through that? I think it really is, the key is really kind of engaging through our mo'olelo and kind of starting there and then moving, like thinking through it, maybe with Kaona. And then applying it to the lesson. So yeah, I can share some of that or some of my ideas for that.
Mahalo, Nolani. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Mana'o across the audience? Nolai lahe wahi mahalo ke ia oi e Nolani. Mahalo for this opportunity to share your work with us, and being that not just you're amazing scholar and poet, but you're a kupa of this place here of A'apueo. I mean, I don't think I knew that actually.
Yeah.
And probably many of us as well. So we welcome you to our campus at some point, when you're back on Maui. I'm sure many of our kumu would love to have you come to their class as a guest speaker and just to share the amazing work that you have been doing throughout the years. So
Oh,
mahalo.
I'd be happy to, I just to add, like I've been teaching at, UH now for 10 years. And I only taught at Kamehameha Kapalama for a couple years, but those I have those were my best teaching years, really. I mean, no shade to my current Awana or anything like that. I love them too, but I always think back on like how much of a like beautiful opportunity it was to work with, our OPO. Our kids are so amazing and beautiful. And just the things that would come from these classroom experiences where we're kind of everybody sharing their mana'o and our kids have so much heart. They already are like coming in with their na'au, like ready to just sort of, share. And that's something really special. I'd always be blown away, even like how profound they would be, but they wouldn't even know it. Like they're saying it as a joke or something. So yeah, anyway, just wanted to share that. I have so much aloha for everything that you folks do and for our OPO. So yeah, mahalo.